Hello, it's Bradley Sowash, and I'm just improvising on a famous jazz chord progression known as rhythm changes. Today we're going to be talking about the fears that hold us back when we're trying to improvise. But I thought I'd just do a little improv up front for a couple of reasons. To give everybody a chance to drop in and to experience what we're going to talk about. Of course, improvisation doesn't have to always be in a jazz style. Anytime you're playing without music, even if it's by accident, you're improvising. All of us probably are dealing with a certain amount of inhibition when we go to improvise. And I want to be clear that what I'm going to talk about today is about the fear of actually making up your own notes. It's really a different topic from stage fright. And that's something I've been thinking a lot about, and I'm going to do a whole article on that and maybe a presentation. But my last newsletter just dealt with a couple of top of my head ideas about overcoming inhibitions with improvisation, and it got a lot of feedback about it. It seemed like I hit a nerve with an interesting topic. So I thought I'd go ahead and do this month's tip of the month, improv tip of the month on Facebook about that. So far I haven't said anything, then welcome. So let's get to some stuff. Let me say that the best part about being an improvisation specialist in my teaching is that I get to witness the breakthroughs of what I gently call recovering classical musicians who begin to experience the joys of improvisation. And they get sometimes very gushy about it. I'm thinking particularly of in this very room, a particular Russian pianist who I taught. She was schooled in a very sort of strict classical environment. We did the simplest little exercise with a couple of chords and a free right hand in C major. And she started to cry. This is a true story. And I thought, I've hit a nerve. I was getting nervous as a teacher. And I said, well, what's wrong? Is this so upsetting? And she said, oh no, I've wanted to do this my whole life. This is the first time I've chosen my own notes. Now that's a very dramatic story, but it taught me just what a big barrier it is to playing freely, especially for trained musicians, trained to the page. And there are ways around that. And I know it's important because I hear those transformational stories from my students and friends. I just want to let you know I improvised in church today for the first time on a hymn. It wasn't an amazing thing that changed music history, but it was wonderful for me. Or I was noodling around with my niece who came over and we had a great time playing on the Black Keys. Or I played my first gig in a nursing home and they loved it. These kinds of things are just music to my ears. Because once you've enjoyed the experience of making up your own notes, you'd rather do that than eat. It's so fun to play whatever you want. There's just a lot of joy in choosing your own notes and connecting your fingers to your imagination. And it doesn't happen overnight, of course. It takes some building to get there. But when people begin to taste it, they're like, I love this. Why didn't anybody show me this before? And as they gain confidence and their playing gets better, often these people, many of who are here, say to their friends, you got to try this. They want to spread the word. I want all musicians to experience this. And they just do that for a little while because it falls on deaf ears. Why does it fall on deaf ears? It's because it's just beyond people's imagination. So when a student says, I'm improvising and you really ought to try it, it's so much fun, how that comes out to the listener is, hey, I just tried Olympic level ski jumping. It's really cool. You should do it. Or I'm doing free diving out of an airplane with no parachute. It's really cool. You should do it. People are like, oh, yeah, right? Because it just seems absolutely impossible. So let's figure out why it is that if there's this much joy to be had, then why don't more musicians give it a go, or why do they hesitate? And I think that comes down to, may as well play a little music here. I can't pay the rent, but you must pay the rent. In the old silent music with the diminished chords to try to represent an audio version of fear. It comes down to fear. Musicians, the more trained they are, the more likely they are to be afraid of making up their own notes. Just as an example, any little kid who can improvise, whether they can know what the heck they're doing or not, just by reaching up and making some sounds, that's a form of improvisation. But the more we're trained, the more we have a sense of that there's a right and a wrong, and that can be very inhibiting. So that biggest barrier is fear. Let me be more specific. I think that there are three kinds of fear that hold back trained musicians. One of them is the fear of playing wrong notes. Now, even though any note can be made to sound right in improvisation, there's a perception that there is right and wrong, and master improvisers will tell you there is no such thing as wrong notes, and it's always like, oh yeah, right. I mean, really, I'm playing a B flat chord with with an E natural with it. That couldn't possibly be right, but it can. E against B flat. You can make a note sound better. So you can drop this idea about what is a right and a wrong note. And here's just a quick tip. I wasn't going to get into this, but if you don't like the note you're playing and hanging on right now, there you really have two approaches. You can repeat it to say, I really meant this, or you can play the nearest note beside it, which is a resolution. So in B flat, and I just let it go to an F, it sounds like it was a good choice. Anyway, so the first fear is fear of playing the wrong notes. The second fear, and this is a big one, is the fear of sounding like a beginner. Because beginning improvisers don't have a very good bag of tricks developed. They don't have a lot of vocabulary, and it's completely like walking on jello. Okay? And in addition, we are comparing that to the incredible way that we sound when we play other people's notes, right? If I want to sound profound, I sound like I'm a deep genius, but I'm not a deep genius. Beethoven is. And I'm borrowing his notes and I will bring some expression to it for sure, and some fingering, some training. But in the end of the day, they are his notes. And when I make a leap from not just playing other people's notes, but playing the notes of the masters, some of the finest composers and musicians in the world, I make that leap to playing my own. And I'm a little disappointed when it doesn't look as good, right? When we actually put that in plain air and take a look at it, we see that's a ridiculous idea. We maybe never thought about it that way. Imagine you're taking your first drawing class and they hand you instead a bunch of oil paints and a Rembrandt and say, see if you can make some art that looks this good. It's just not going to happen. So that first thing is our being afraid of our notes, wrong notes. Second one is being afraid of sounding like a beginner. And I think the third thing is that we feel we lack sufficient talent. We imagine that someone who's a good improviser was somehow born that way, that it's a prerequisite for their ability, that they're somehow have an extremely high musical intelligence. So there's the three fears: playing wrong notes, sounding like a beginner, and lacking sufficient talent. There are probably others. Let me talk for a minute about how I think this happens. It's an unwelcome side effect of traditional training that overemphasizes flawlessly playing the notes on the page. Okay? When we have an absolute right and wrong and a bar to measure our playing against, which is black and white, it's right on that page. I don't have any music near me. Isn't that interesting? That proof that I'm an improviser. When we have that black and white comparison, did I do what those notes said? All interpretation aside, did I at least just get those notes? We have a subtle ingrained effect that there is always a right and wrong, and that reading is supreme, and that our own choice about choosing notes, at least, is not allowed. And so I want to make this caveat. I'm not down on classical training. I've had a lot of classical training myself. It's just, I mean, well, first of all, it fosters worthy skills. I made a little list here. So, of course, reading music is essential. Reading music is 50% of the way to be a good musician, right? So everybody needs to learn to read music. And a great way to do that is traditional instruction. It also gives us an appreciation for music history. So we can give a live stream talk on Facebook and whip out, the Moonlight Sonata that I just played, or Chopin, or whatever. We have these references in our background, and that's very valuable. And of course, it hones technique. Classical players who are trained tend to have some technique to burn. So it's, traditional training is not wrong. It's just that it's unbalanced. It doesn't include making up your own notes. And the worst thing about that, and this is a big one, is that the more we use our eyes, the more we lose touch with our inner ears. So if we're going to play, I can't believe I did that in the right key. It was totally by accident. If I play in an Irish jam session every other Tuesday on mandolin, and they pull out tunes every time that I've never heard before. And as I work through the second and third repetition, I'm beginning to get most of it. And that didn't happen at first. That comes from spending time trying to pick up other people's music by ear. But I am, and this is different, able to play whatever comes to my ear from years of connecting my imagination to my fingers. I demonstrated that earlier. So we don't want to lose that connection to our inner musical imagination. In fact, we want to foster our imagination so that when we can't fall asleep at night, we can just imagine some music in our heads. Not necessarily ear training where we're numbering the notes or figuring out what the notes are, but just enjoying the creation of music in our own unconscious. Maybe we're on a walk and we use the pace of our feet as a tempo to which we hum a ditty or a variation on a tune we know. Okay, so I get it. I get why this happens, and I don't blame anybody for it. Like any skilled, trained player, I've had my share of it. Recital traumas, hives breaking out to get ready for recitals in music school. The awful experience that music students go through where you're in a jury, where you're playing, and behind you is four great piano teachers writing down notes every time you play a wrong, mistake. You hear them scribbling about how what you did wrong. That is terrifying. And even I would argue, and I'm going to give a talk on this, that it happens to little kids. We shouldn't even be doing recitals with them. And that's controversial. I'll do a whole talk on that at some point. I think that recitals cause way more damage than they do create confidence. There are other ways to experience performing that are less crazy than being alone on a stage when you're a little kid. That, I didn't mean to get into that, but the point is I have the same scars that you do. But I know that there's this hidden island where music flows like milk and honey. I know that there's this way to enjoy yourself and have a great time playing. And I've pretty much improvised my way through all the classical music that I've played too, in the sense that I've learned to own it. I'm not saying I'm the model. I'm just saying that if I can overcome my training inhibitions, so can you. So all that is to say, here are my tips about doing an attitude adjustment. And again, I want to emphasize, we're not talking about stage fright right now. We're talking about just the fear of what to play. Sometimes I would have a musician here and I'd say, let's just do C, D, and E. You can play C, D, and E. And maybe I would do a little background under that, And I'm looking for like C, D, E, C, D, E, E, D, E, C. Just choose a note, play one of them. And it's not uncommon for the first time improviser to say, which one should I play first? Which one do you want to play first? Well, how would I decide? You see, that's coming from a sense of that there's a right and wrong. So I'm going to talk about this in two stages. First, for musicians to foster an attitude adjustment, of which we all are. And then I'm going to talk about it to give some tips for teachers to help their students be freer at the keyboard than perhaps their teachers were for them. So having established the basis for how this happened and acknowledging that it does happen, how do we get over it? I want to first talk about the don'ts and then the do's, okay? Thanks for those. First, the don'ts. Don't buy into the talent myths. Don't buy into these myths. There's a myth that you have to be talented to improvise, right? And I've taught improvisation and played it for 30 years, and it's not true. I'm not from Mars. I improvise freely now, but nobody told me when I was a kid I was gifted, that I had a good ear, that my fingers were dexterous, which they aren't, that they were long, which they aren't. I just liked it. It was love, not talent, that led me down this road. And I would argue that the counter to buying in that talent is the way to play. The opposite of that is knowledge is way more important than people think. We believe that improvisers just sort of spout off these genius things, but in fact, we're thinking about the key signature, the chord at hand, an appropriate scale, a lick we practiced before. There's a lot of knowledge that can be applied, and that is way more important than talent. Not to say imagination isn't part of it, but probably that's the last bit after we've learned the building blocks. So the first myth is don't buy into the talent myth. The second one is don't buy into the technique or genius music theory myth, okay? So even non-musicians can improvise as soon as they can produce a tone. In fact, a great exercise for you here is to pick up your instrument, or someone else's instrument, an easy instrument that produces a tone readily, such as an Irish whistle, or a harmonica that you don't know how to play, or a thumb piano, the African sanza or kalimba, and make some music on it. And you won't be inhibited by all your training. And just see if you can get past making a sound to making a rhythmic, coherent musical statement. It's a great exercise to make you realize that it doesn't come from technique, that there's no right, wrong, and correct wrist position and proper posture involved in just making music. Okay, the next myth that is a don't is don't believe that master improvisers always know what they're playing. Okay? All of us are making up a good dose of it and being surprised ourselves when the fingers do things that by themselves or that were not intended. I think that if I'm at the top of my game and playing very well, I might be doing about 70% of what I intended. At first, I didn't know what those notes were going to sound like before I played them, but I knew that they were in G. I knew what they would fit the chord, and so on. So I just let it flow out. So we have this perception, since the music's all given to us when it's written, that when we improvise, it will be equally, well thought out. It's almost like we picture an improviser with the music running in their head, and all they have to do is play it. It's not like that. It's like taking a walk in a strange city. I know where my feet will go. I know kind of where north is. I know that I'm hungry, and those are some parameters to lead me through. And those are equivalent to knowing the key or the tune or the chords or whatever. And you follow your nose with using your knowledge. So improvisers don't know what they're doing. They just enjoy the ride, and then you enjoy it with them. The last myth is don't buy into the idea that it's spontaneous. This is a big one. Improvisers have a big bag of pre-learned licks. Now, it's not true, at least for a more trained or more skilled improviser, that they're just putting lick number 42 with lick number 3. Lick number 1, lick number 2, lick number 3. And that myth is propagated by these silly things where they say 100 essential blues licks you must know. Download them today. Those are helpful. Copying other people's licks are fun, but ultimately, we want to get through those licks to doing our own thing. And then we want to have those in our pocket, though, a few of those, and especially ones we find ourselves, so that when we're improvising, whether it's on 3 black keys or not, we have a favorite we can go to when inspiration fades and we become hyper aware of everybody listening. Maybe it's A flat, B flat, G flat. Maybe I already made that up, So I went to, in that case, I just made it up, but maybe that's one of my favorites and I just go to it. And it's okay to have some, not only some licks, but a pre-planned form. Like I'm going to start quiet and get bigger, or I'm going to start in the key and then add some blue notes, things like that. That's all cool. So you don't have to be totally spontaneous. Okay, those were the don'ts. Here are the do's. Here's more about the attitude stuff. Welcome self-expression without judgment every time you approach your instrument. Get rid of the judger, okay? Those are ghosts. Those are your nightmare teachers haunting you And we all have this perception that there are music police out in the audience. This touches a little on stage fright, but it's almost like we think people are out there taking it. Oh, did you hear that one? And you know what? That does happen, but only when there's fellow musicians, because they're jealous, because you're playing and they aren't. And those are hard to drop. Just this week, I posted on YouTube a video of me playing Misty. And I've played this tune for 30 years. Okay? And in one of the jazz forums on this Facebook, somebody wrote right under it, it stinks. He stinks. He stinks. Now, I have enough accolades and awards to know that is not fair. It's not right. I don't stink. I don't compare myself to the geniuses, but I know I don't stink. And I looked it up, and it turned out to be like this 8-year-old kid. I went down. But you know what? I thought of that 3 more times that day. So, we let that stuff in. But the more you play, the more you can say, that's their problem. All right. So welcome that self-expression without judgment. Second, expect unintended notes. The first thing I do when I sit down to play is I say, I'm going to play a bunch of stuff that I don't know what the heck it is. I just know that. And I approach that with a so what attitude. And that's what you should do. So what? Keep your beat and the music will be sweet. Right? So just keep it going. And just to kind of prove this, I just thought of this. I'll play with an iPhone. Okay? Okay, so it's not great music, but it still was musical, right? And the notes were secondary to the cool rhythms and things like that. So expect unintended notes and know that 2 wrongs in improv make a right. 2 wrongs make a right. If you don't like what you played, do it again. That's an old jazz trick. Okay, that what was that, right? So do it again, and it makes it work. And it might even be that your wrong note is a really cool, interesting note. So let that possibility be there. Oh, I didn't mean to play that, but Okay, next, embrace your inner child. Playing music can actually mean playing. Get in a sandbox, get out your Tonka toy trucks and shovels and pails, and have fun with music, right? It's so hard to do that when we're so trained on such a difficult instrument as well, all our instruments are difficult, but say piano or violin or something that really takes a lot of years to even get something that's coherent. We then get into all this stuff, and it drives me crazy. I see it on the piano forums where someone will say, I need to rant. My students' wrists aren't correct, or they have long fingernails again. I get it; those kind of matter, but they're so secondary to creating a musical experience, right? So be able to play, be able to just let things happen, and see where it leads you. Noodling around, exploring your ideas with little regard for the outcome. Not all the time. Obviously, if you're learning a Beethoven sonata, we're not doing this approach. We're talking about doing this alongside our traditional training and playing. Okay, another attitude adjustment is make the music for yourself. So what I mean by that is avoid comparing yourself to more experienced improvisers. Everyone has to start somewhere, and your goal is not even to copy more experienced improvisers. You don't want to sound like Art Tatum or Keith Jarrett or Franz Liszt. You want to sound like you. And you might not know yet what you sounds like. You have not maybe discovered your voice. But keep improvising, keep writing, keep composing, keep creating. And sooner or later, it happened to me, it happens to all players. Someone says, I could just tell that was you by the way you played it. And then you know that your voice is emerging. You can't force it. You can't say, I'm going to be all about using all 12 notes every 4 measures. That's cerebral. You will find it just happens. The way you play is the way you play. And you got to honor that. It comes from wherever your spiritual beliefs are. It comes from somewhere magical where your personality will start to shine through the technique. Lastly, acknowledge that you have a vast store of musical instincts that will serve you. We think, I don't know anything about improvisation. Really? You know how to keep a beat. You know how to feel 4/4 time. You know your key signatures. You know your chords. You know when a phrase sounds done. You know how to make a good tone on your instrument. I mean, there's so much that you already have. We are musical people here. If you're not a musical person, my guess is you're watching some other live stream right now. So you already have 75% of it together. Just acknowledge that. I have a lot going on. I'm a good musician. Let that sink in. Give yourself some self-care and push away those haunting music police. All right, so that is the bit about working on your own musicianship. So now moving to teacher tips. Leaving aside all the theory and technique parts of playing our instruments, just for the moment, this is how you can support your students emotionally. And it comes down to honest encouragement. Honest encouragement. Never give a false compliment. Oh, that was good, but if someone's doing off-page improvisation, playing the simplest little thing, whether it's Forrest Kinney's pattern play books or Bradley Sowash's That's Jazz books or a pattern you discovered, thank you for those. You are going to just find something good to say about it. Okay, and you're going to compliment all attempts. This is this little ember. This is this little creative thing trying for the first time to make some music on their own. Don't put it out, right? Even if it's wobbly, you could find something to commend. You could say, I love how you played that with a steady beat. You have such a beautiful touch. I admire your courage for trying something new. I love the way you isolated the particular concept, how you concentrated just on repeated notes. And, you might even say, if they freak out and don't improvise at all, say you're playing the accompaniment. And you say, you just play a little B flat thing. And they go. You can say, Amanda, I really love how you used rests in that improvisation. And then there'll be a smile, and then you see that it's safe. So compliment all attempts, but make them real compliments. Not that was good. Say what you heard and why it worked. And that brings me to the second one. Name what you hear, even if you have to make it up. So I loved how you used neighbor notes to embellish that melody that time. I'm just give that a name. Or, I like the way you did squiggles. So you don't even never have to use correct terminology, something like a turn, but whatever. Just give it a name and say, so that it becomes a thing. So name what you heard. And then ask open-ended questions for which you really do want to know the answer. Because as teachers, we say, now, how many flats are in the key of B flat? And then the students ask questioningly, 2? And what are they? Those are not open-ended questions. I mean, make it clear to your student that you actually are asking it, that you want to know. So you could say, what are some other ways to change up this melody? Maybe it's, and then really mean it. So the student says, well, we could play it backwards. Maybe then try it. And don't say, well, that wasn't an exact retrograde. Say, well, that was cool. Maybe the student says an idea that is ridiculous. What if I played it in another key? Your response is, let's try it. What do we think of that? It leads to a discussion. You're a fellow journeyer on the music-making journey. You're like a coach with slightly more experience. You're not the teacher knows all and the student is an empty vessel. Next, I already hit this. Avoid insincerity. I wrote here in my notes, that was very good, but those are killer statements. Don't do that. That squashes creativity. It suggests that there's one right way, and there isn't. And sometimes what you think sounds good, they don't. And the other way around. So let it be an event. They don't have to walk away with new knowledge. You have to walk away with a creative music making experience from each time you delve into this. And then I hit it earlier. Replace the teacher knows all with the idea of mutual exploration. So I'm going to just play a little bit as you take off. And I want to say that I want to wish you this year plenty of nerve and pluck as you continue your music journey. And until next time, enjoy your creative music making journey. And I'll see you again. Bye for now. So fun.